Let's be honest, managing diabetes takes time, but ordering supplies should be simple. That's why I'm so excited to partner with US Med for this podcast. US Med stands out with their unwavering dedication to your health and well-being. They proudly hold the #1 spot as the distributor for Freestyle Libre systems nationwide, ensuring you have access to cutting-edge diabetes management. I love that they always provide 90 days worth of supplies and fast free shipping. And they accept Medicare nationwide and collaborate with over 800 private insurers. US Med is your trusted partner in diabetes care. Visit usmed.com/Stacey. That's usmed.com/STACEY. Today on Diabetes Connections Type 2, what you eat is an important part of managing diabetes. By now, we all know being super restrictive isn't the way to go, so let's talk about some easier ways to work in more healthy foods without turning your life upside down. We'll also talk about insulin resistance and explain why this is an important part of understanding diabetes. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Hello and welcome to Diabetes Connections Type 2. I'm your host, Stacey Sims, and I am really glad to have you here. We launched this show in late 2023. I've hosted another podcast focused on Type 1 for more than 8 years, and it just seemed like the time was right to have something like that for the Type 2 community. So thank you for being here. I am thrilled to be talking about this. My husband lives with Type 2. My son lives with Type 1. I don't have any kind of diabetes, but I have a background in journalism, in broadcasting, and that is how you get the podcast. So this is the time of year when a lot of New Year's resolutions are pretty much forgotten. If you're still working on yours, congratulations. Mine are long gone. And if that's you, and if eating better was one of them, it's possible that you just tried to do too much at once. So this week's guest is going to give us some advice about starting slower and staying in it for the long run. But first, as usual, let's jump in with just a bit of diabetes education. And I want to talk about insulin resistance. We hear this a lot. Why is it important? Well, insulin resistance is, as it sounds, when the body's cells become less responsive, more resistant to insulin. And of course, that is the hormone that helps regulate blood sugar levels. Normally, when you eat, your pancreas releases insulin to help glucose or sugar enter your cells to provide energy. With insulin resistance, the cells don't respond well to insulin signal. Glucose remains in the bloodstream, leading to high blood sugar levels. Insulin resistance can affect anybody. You don't actually have to have diabetes. It could be temporary. Maybe you're using some kind of medication like steroids for a brief period of time, or it can be chronic. Several factors contribute to insulin resistance, including genetics, what they call lifestyle choices, how much you eat, how much you exercise, and being overweight or obese. Excess body fat, especially around your stomach, can increase the release of fatty acids and inflammatory substances, which interferes with insulin's ability to work effectively. Over time, insulin resistance can lead to prediabetes or eventually to type 2. Just like with type 2, there's a lot you can do here. Eating a diet low in processed sugars and fats, exercising more. But, a lot of people are going to need medication or even insulin to help the body better respond here. Lots more information on insulin resistance. This comes from the Cleveland Clinic, and I'm going to link it up in the show notes. You can find that wherever you're listening. Every podcast app has like a tab that says learn more, or sometimes you just scroll up. If you have any trouble, though, head on over to diabetes-connections.com, click on the Type 2 show, and every episode has more information that you should be able to easily click on and see the whole thing. All right, as you can imagine, I get a lot of PR pitches and emails about these shows, about both podcasts. And they include everything from nutrition and book authors, technology, to a bunch of junk and snake oil. So I try to be really careful who I talk to. I want to make sure I'm bringing you guests that bring you value. So when the American pistachio growers reached out to me, I almost deleted the email. But I'm glad I didn't, because I looked into who they wanted me to talk to. I think he's got a lot of great and straightforward help. And yes, we do talk about pistachios. Dr. Mike Roussell holds a degree in biochemistry and a PhD in nutrition. He's written several books, including The 6 Pillars of Nutrition and Strength, the Field Manual. And he's written for Eating Well and Men's Health, as well as many other publications. You will hear from Mike Roussell right after this. Over the years, my family has tried a lot of things, and we found a great tool to keep your insulin at the exact right temperature. It's called a VIVI Cap, and even in the extreme heat or cold, this does the job. It basically goes right over your insulin pen. It acts as a cap. You actually take the regular cap off the pen and slide on the VIVI Cap. It lasts for years, it fits all pens, and it's super easy to use. If you live in a place with extreme temperatures like we do, in the summertime around here, Benny can be outdoors at camp. He was a lifeguard this past summer. It can get over 100 degrees, and you don't want to put your insulin at risk. It's FSA and HSA eligible, as well as TSA approved, and they'll give you a 2-year warranty. Learn more. I've got a link in the show notes. You always get a discount when you use it. You'll find the same link at diabetes-connections.com. Look for the TempraMed VIVI Cap logo. Mike, thanks so much for joining me. I appreciate you spending some time with us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Before we jump in, do you mind sharing a little bit about yourself? Tell me a little bit about your background and kind of how you got where you are.
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. So my background, I have a degree in biochemistry, PhD in nutrition. In between those two things, I spent about a year or so in medical school. Thought I wanted to be a medical doctor. Just didn't feel like it was the right path. So went off to graduate school in the realm of more discovery of science and studied cardiometabolic disease. So cardiovascular disease, diabetes, did controlled feeding studies at Penn State. That was a lot of fun. My personal interest in nutrition had always been through sports. And so it was this interesting mix of the detail that is in weight training and sports nutrition. And then we ran controlled feeding studies where we would weigh and measure all the food that we would give people. So you would come to the clinic, we'd give you breakfast, you'd get a cooler with all your food, you'd come back the next day and repeat that process. And, as you can imagine, when you do that with people, you actually get really good results. Like when you have an army of graduate students weighing and measuring their food. And then so as I left graduate school and started doing a variety of other things in nutrition, I realized that normal humans don't really work that way. So then it became this, really, I think what's been the most interesting part for me in my career is how do we take these nutritional strategies that we know work, but then get them to work in people's lives? And that's really, I think, what I would consider my life's work is how do we take the true, good, evidence-based science, but then help people apply it to their life in a way that they could do it consistently. And so I've done that over the years through writing. So I wrote a column for Shape Magazine for 4 years, a weekly column. I've written columns for Men's Health. I'm closing in on my 10th book at this point. Done a lot of communication on television as well. And it's all about that. How do we take science, but then put it in a way that is accessible for people in their daily life? Because generally when I walk in the room, like I'm the only one who cares about nutrition. Like everybody else thinks about other things. Like nutrition's not top on anybody's list, except unless you have your PhD in nutrition, I think. They're always thinking about your life, your schedule, where are you going? What are you doing? Who are all the people you're responsible for? And nutrition quickly falls to the wayside on the priority list. I always say clients are very eager on Sunday nights, and nutrition is a number one priority in their life as they get ready to start their new eating plan on Monday. And then by Monday at 11, life reshifts their priorities. And how can you still be successful with your nutrition even in those situations? And I think that's where the magic of nutrition is. And that's what I'm always trying to help people figure out.
If you heard me chuckle there, it's because we are talking Monday at 11 o'clock. I am one of the people to whom you are referring, because every Sunday I'm like, I am going to eat more vegetables with breakfast. Like I'm going to find a way. I ate no vegetables with breakfast this morning. But Mike, all right, so now we've established that we're human.
Yep.
When people are diagnosed with type 2 and they start looking for information, it is so overwhelming. Everybody has that desire to, do better, eat well. I'm going to get this under control. Can you talk a little bit about just, where to start? Something simple.
Yeah, I think getting started, like you hit it on the nail on the head there. How do you start simple? Let's not overhaul your entire life, but let's start simple. And I think the simplest two places for people to start are paying attention to added sugars, where their sugars have been added to the food that they're consuming. And that is a very simple distinction, but all of a sudden it makes your food choices a lot easier because you're not sitting there thinking, oh, wait, is this apple that I'm about to eat going to make my diabetes worse? Because it has sugar in it, but it's it's intact sugar, right? It's kind of naturally contained versus am I going to have, this sauce to add to my vegetables that has added sugars to it. And so I think if we're able to first really start looking at where are the added sugars in our life, that's step one. And it sounds really simple, but when you start paying attention to it, you realize that added sugars are everywhere.
Yeah.
It really is it's a simple guidepost that is greatly going to shift your food choices. And then the second piece that from a food perspective is trying to look at more unprocessed and minimally processed foods. I think the idea of food processing is greatly misunderstood by most people, and kind of this processed food is bad, unprocessed food is good. And there is some truth to that dichotomy, but not all processed food or not all types of processing is bad. I think if you look at, for example, tomatoes, research shows that processed tomatoes, you think pasta sauce or salsa or any of those kinds of crushed tomatoes, that's all processing. And that actually unleashes more nutrients from the tomatoes. So it's not that processing is bad. It's just sometimes in that manufacturing process, salt and sugar and other things get added to the foods that make it really easy to eat, allow you to chew it less so you can consume more calories per minute. And that just makes everything more difficult because if you're in a situation where you have type 2 diabetes, you're going to be concerned about total calories. You're concerned about how can I control my body weight, because those are things that are going to positively impact your blood sugar control. So if you can focus more on unprocessed and minimally processed foods, which are foods that you're eating in their natural state, an apple, a carrot, an egg, things like that, or foods that have been processed to make it a little bit easier for you to access the food. I think examples of that are rice or oatmeal, like rolled oats, like they crush the oats. Olive oil would be another example, where they're not necessarily adding more things to the food, but they're just changing that structure so you're allowed to kind of consume it more easily in your life. Those two classifications of food, if you focus on those, and I, for all intents and purposes, just call them minimally processed foods. If you focus on those minimally processed foods, that also then makes a really big difference. And what you find is you get to eat a lot more food for a lot less calories. You're going to end up, these foods, you have to chew them more, so it takes a little bit longer for you to eat your meals. And that whole process of slowing down is really good for controlling total food intake. And it's also really good for controlling blood sugar release, because if you actually chew, it causes your body to actually pre-release insulin. So then by the time the food hits your digestive system, you've already kind of primed the pump a little bit to help control blood sugar. And if we're eating a lot of these ultra-processed foods who have been manipulated in a way where you don't have to chew them as much, you also lose that additional benefit.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I've always felt like, I'll grab a smoothie, even if it's made with really wonderful ingredients. I just feel hungry again in a little while. And I think it's because I'm not chewing it.
Yeah, no, totally. And, the smoothie thing is a great point. And it kind of, when you said that earlier, you had this, you want to eat more vegetables. And like we're at 11, you're like, oh man, I didn't eat vegetables. There's this give and take of ease of use. Like I think smoothies are great because you can pack in, you throw in some protein powder, you throw in some frozen vegetables, like, nuts like pistachios and ice, and blend it up and you can drink it and you get a ton of nutrition. The flip side is liquid nutrition is never as satiating or as filling as solid nutrition. And, protein is a great example because protein itself is a very filling macronutrient. So you think protein, carbohydrate, fats, those are main kind of macronutrients. Protein is the most filling. But if it's liquid protein, it's not. It's just about as satiating as carbohydrate. And so the form of the food as we consume it does make a big impact. So if you are someone that's thinking, I have a big appetite, which I would definitely raise my hand if someone ever asked who in the room has a big appetite, you really want to try to actually eat more meals, because the eating the whole foods and the chewing and going through the whole process is going to make you feel more full and satisfied. The plus side of the liquid, like a smoothie, is you can do it when you're in a pinch and it's very easy to calorie control. So if you look at a lot of research studies that use, meal replacement shakes or smoothies for weight loss or even diabetes management, one of the reasons it works so well is because it's very easy to control calories. Like this is 300 calories and it's clear cut. Whereas if you're making a meal, you use a little bit extra olive oil, the scoop of rice is a little bit bigger, and all of a sudden it's a 600 calorie meal. And so there are pluses and minuses to both. And, we opened this up where you said there's so much information out there about diabetes and managing your diabetes. Like, how do you get started? And I think it's important. I always tell clients, we got to kind of live in the gray zone. It's not black and white all the time. Like there are pluses and minuses to these things, and it's just good for you to make the right choice for you. Like we were talking about this whole food versus liquid foods. There are pluses and minuses, and in certain situations, it's going to benefit you to go with the smoothie, and in other situations, it might not, and that's fine.
All right. So you mentioned three things that really got my ears perked up. You said, and I know as you listened, you were doing the same. So I'm going to ask it for you. Apples, rice, oatmeal. These are things that many people with diabetes have been told, don't eat that, stay away from that. And if you wear a continuous glucose monitor, and I know a lot of influencers, God love the influencers, who have worn them and will show, like, I ate an apple and look at that spike. You should never have oatmeal. Look at that spike. I'm with you, Mike, but tell me why it's okay to eat those things even with diabetes.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I get an ad sometimes for a constant glucose monitor where there's someone there talking about, look what happens when you eat strawberries. And I eat these strawberries and look at I'm like, God, like strawberries are like how are you going to say anything bad about berries? It's like nuts, extra virgin olive oil, and berries. Like no one can say anything bad about those things. Like, it just doesn't make it doesn't make any sense to me. Where I think that people miss out is it's okay if your blood sugar goes, if you eat carbohydrates, which carbohydrates at their most simplest level contain glucose and these other simple sugars, but primarily your body's going to pare it down to glucose, a little bit of fructose. That is going to enter your bloodstream. And so by definition, your bloodstream is going to have to go up. But the question really then, with diabetes becomes, does it stay elevated? And how long does it stay elevated? Like, is your body adept at bringing the blood sugar back down? Basically saying, oh, okay, we have this fuel. Now what do we do with it? And not to oversimplify diabetes or type 2 diabetes, but it's essentially your body has trouble bringing it back down and dealing with those sugars. And so when someone says, oh, I had oatmeal and my blood sugar went up, like, well, of course, because where do you think those carbohydrates were going? If they're not going to your bloodstream, like, I don't know where they're just headed through your large intestine. So I think we really need to focus, it's important to focus on what happens afterwards. And constant, CGMs, I think, are really interesting because if you are trying to manage your blood sugar in a way because you have type 2 diabetes, you can see, how much of a carbohydrate load your body can handle. So it's not that oatmeal is bad, but maybe you can't have half a cup of dry oats at breakfast by themselves because it does cause this elevated and sustained rise in your blood sugar levels. So you need to give your body a little bit less carbohydrate or add things like fats. Mentioned pistachios earlier. There's research to show that when you add pistachios to a meal, it helps lower that blood sugar response. You could add protein to help do the same thing. So there's a bunch of tricks that you can do. But in the end, if you eat carbohydrates and your blood sugar rises right afterwards, that's pretty much what you would expect. But it's at the 30, 60, 90-minute mark, then what's happening? And, that's really what tells more of the important story in my mind.
Yeah. Starting with the CGM is so fascinating because my son was diagnosed with type 1 when he was 2. We did not have one until he was 9 years old, just because of the technology. And As soon as you put a CGM on, you're like, whoa, this is an amazing way to look at blood glucose. And it can be a really helpful tool. It can be extremely overwhelming as well. So we really found it to be obviously quite helpful when you have type 1 diabetes and you're dosing insulin all the time. But you learn what foods do. And, there's, as you said, there's that natural sugar in the apple, but I'm certainly not going to keep my kid from eating apples. You make these choices based on more than one factor, certainly. And nutrition has got to be at the top of the list.
Yeah. I mean, the only way you could not get your blood sugar to rise after a meal is if you didn't eat carbohydrates. And so, that's the funny part of these ads and kind of the proliferation of this mindset is it's like saying I had this cup of coffee and then I fell asleep. And you'd be surprised by that. Like if you have caffeine, you're going to be stimulated. Like if you have carbohydrates, your blood sugar is going to go up a little bit. Like these are all normal things.
Let's follow up with that because a low carb or as close to no carb diet is something a lot of people will push for diabetes. I think that's really difficult to maintain, but it is out there. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think your comment is spot on again. It's very difficult to maintain. And there's been a handful of research studies out of Stanford by a researcher named Christopher Gardner looking at diets at a variety of different macronutrient levels. So like a Atkins diet versus kind of a middle of the road diet versus a Ornish diet, which is a high carbohydrate, low fat diet. He also ran some studies looking at low carb versus low fat over long periods of time. And what they really found, if you kind of sift through all the headlines, is that all these diets are effective, but they have varying degrees of compliance. Having run clinical studies, nutrition clinical trials, one of the hard parts that I don't think we acknowledge enough is one of the gold standard moves in a clinical study is you randomize people. So it's not what's your dietary preference. It's you get this diet, you get that diet, and you get this diet, you get that diet. You kind of go down the line or you go down the Excel sheet and assign these diets. And so, I see, for example, in my life, like I'm pretty actually flexible nutritionally. Like I could eat a very low carbohydrate diet and function fine. I could eat a higher carbohydrate diet, also function fine. My wife, for example, could not eat. If she ate a very low carbohydrate diet, she would really struggle with low blood sugar levels. So it's not for her. And I think if we've learned anything in the last 10 years of nutrition, is there are a variety of dietary patterns, like a patterning of how you eat that can lead you to the health outcome you're looking for. And so there's no reason to force yourself into an eating strategy that doesn't fit with you. If you have type 2 diabetes, don't feel like you have to eat a very low carbohydrate or ketogenic diet because that's the only way. You may, depending on the level of kind of metabolic dysfunction you have with your diabetes, you may need to control carbohydrates more than your friend who's also a type 2 diabetic, but you don't have to eliminate everything. It's finding this blend of personal preference and human physiology that is that really is the secret sauce.
Mike, you have mentioned pistachios just a couple times. Great food, big fan. We connected because of an email from the American Pistachio Growers. Obviously, we connected because you have a lot more to say than pistachios are great, and I appreciate you sharing so much time with me about that. But let's talk about that for a minute. I'm not endorsed by the pistachio folks, but I am curious. I love them. I have to buy them not shelled because I will eat them too quickly. But what is the big deal, right? We always hear almonds are great, but tell me about pistachios, Mike.
I definitely share a similar problem with shelled pistachios that keeping them in the shell to slow down the consumption is a good strategy on my end. I had mentioned this before that nuts are universally one of the healthiest foods, unless you have a nut allergy, for you to eat for your health. And, what has drawn me over to pistachios, and I've been fortunate enough to work with the American Pistachio Growers on some research projects and also talking about the benefits of pistachios across the world. There is this unique nutrient package to pistachios. So they have fat, fiber, and protein, which is common in nuts, but they have this antioxidant mix that research has really started to uncover as unique. And also the protein that are found in pistachios is also unique in that it's complete. So it contains all the amino acids that your body needs. Mostly complete proteins are animal proteins. So it's rather unique amongst plants. But the research that is directly with people with diabetes and also gestational diabetes and type 2 diabetes shows that when you consume pistachios with a meal, it lowers blood sugar response. In women with gestational diabetes, they can have it as a snack and elicit basically no blood sugar response, despite, it's a little bit of carbohydrate found in pistachios. So it's a great way for people who need to have blood sugar control, but also want high quality nutrition in their diet. Because, when you were mentioning earlier about people cutting carbs, like the traditional, I'm going to start cutting carbs is like you start eating eggs and bacon. And you're like, what happened to all the nutrients? So finding ways where you can get high quality nutrition, vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, fiber in a low carbohydrate package is really important. And, pistachios do that really well.
All right, I'm going to give you one more pistachio hit here. I have to follow up on that. So you said early in the show about smoothies and you were like, throw some pistachios in there. And I was like, what? I have never put smoothies in a drink. I'm going to give you the floor, Mike. Give me some ways to incorporate pistachios more into our diets.
So pistachios in a smoothie is probably the dark horse of amazing nutrition that you haven't tried yet. And the reason is they have this naturally kind of buttery texture that goes really well in a smoothie. And there are also some other nuts that when you blend them in a smoothie, they settle to the bottom And so that's kind of gross. And pistachios don't do that, which is nice. Love them in yogurt. Love them just as a snack. My wife makes fun of me about this, but probably my favorite food meals is rice with extra virgin olive oil, everything bagel seasoning, and pistachios. And I'll pair it with some sort of protein. But that combination is just so good. So if you're like, what's a different way I could try pistachios? Rice, extra virgin olive oil, everything bagel seasoning, and pistachios. It will blow your mind. I promise you.
I'm going to make this. So does it matter what kind of rice? White rice, brown rice, wild rice?
I wouldn't do wild. I would do either brown or white.
Okay. My husband's the cook in the family. He just got a new recipe.
Just like, drizzle a little extra virgin olive oil and it's amazing.
That's great.
Nutrition is the most powerful tool that you have access to. And we started this conversation with the discussion about how it can be really overwhelming. And I always would stress this to clients that this is the body that you have for the rest of your life. We don't need to solve the problem with your next meal, but we need to create an understanding and a plan that you're going to be able to apply meal after meal after meal to get you healthy. And I think oftentimes we try to look at nutrition or health as a 10-meter sprint, not an ultra marathon. And it's an ultra marathon. So that would be my one thing. And if I could have a bonus one, it would be not nutritionally related, but from an activity perspective, is just try to get more movement in your life. I am consistently amazed around the research on sedentary behavior and risk of diabetes and blood sugar control. So this isn't even about getting the 150 minutes of exercise a week or getting 7,000 to 10,000 steps a day. It's about not sitting for 4 hours straight. And without deliberate phone notifications and alarms, I'm just as guilty as the next person because I'll be at my desk working all day. But make that extra effort to get up, move around for 1 or 2 minutes, and then sit back down, that it really will have a measurable impact on your blood sugar control.
Mike, thank you so much for joining me. This was great. I have recipes to give my husband, which is always a bonus for me. And I appreciate you spending some time with us. Thanks again.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
I'll link up more information about Mike, where you can find out more about his books and some of those recipes. He's got those on his website as well. That will all be at diabetes-connections.com. Just click on the Type 2 show. If you like what you hear, I'd love it if you could leave us a review or just a simple rating wherever you're listening. Apple Podcasts is probably the biggest one, and you can just leave a review right there or click on the star rating. We would love 5 stars. And that really helps a new show like this kind of tell people that it is worth listening to when they're searching for a diabetes podcast. So I'd really appreciate your help there. Thank you so much to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here soon. Until then, be kind to yourself.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.